morning and happy Independence Day. My name is Katie Reineke-Pritchett and I am the president of the Friends of the Workingmen's Institute. And on behalf of our organization, welcome to our non-traditional, traditional 4th of July celebration. Please join me in reciting our Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We are celebrating today in New Harmony at the Workingmen's Institute, which is the longest continuously operating library in Indiana. The Friends Board decided that this tradition, started by our community's founders over 200 years ago, was too important to cancel and decided to celebrate a little bit differently. For our first attendees, New Harmony was established in 1814 by a group of renegade Lutherans from Germany who came to America seeking religious freedom. Led by Father Georg Rapp, the Harmonists settled here on the banks of the Wabash River and loved America. In letters sent to relatives in Germany, they expressed their joy at the prospect that in America they could do and be whatever they chose. They no longer constrained to social limitations. Consequently, they began celebrating Independence Day with zeal. The community gathered to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, sing patriotic songs, to hear the Declaration of Independence read in its entirety, and to hear a keynote speech. After the program, they would gather together for a community picnic and enjoy free beer made by the Harmonists themselves. In previous years, we have expanded the event with the addition of a community golf cart parade and the replacement of free root beer. This year, the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage is being celebrated. New Harmony has long been a community that recognized the talent, the intellect, and the strength of women. To recognize and celebrate the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, this year, the Friends of the Workingmen's Institute look to women to lead our celebration. Therefore, let's begin by listening to our national anthem, sung by the New Harmony Community Choir, under the direction of Mrs. Tina Schutte.
Please stand and join us in singing the national anthem.
On July 4th, 1776, Congress approved the Declaration of Independence and then further ordered that copies of the Declaration be sent to several assemblies, conventions, and committees or councils of safety, and to several commanding officers of the Continental troops, that it be proclaimed in each of the United States and at the head of the Army. Let us listen as Mrs. Amanda Wilson proclaims our Declaration of Independence.
In Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose, obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Tamara Allison is a gardener of children and flowers. She has been teaching kindergarten and planting flowers in Posey County for 28 years. Originally from Fort Branch, Indiana, she holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Southern Indiana and a Master's in Education from Indiana State University. It's been a true pleasure to work with and learn from Tammy the last 15 years at Hedges Central Elementary School and West Elementary School. And now it is my honor to introduce this master educator to you, Tamara Allison.
Good morning. Thank you, Amanda, and thanks to the Working Men's Institute for hosting today. When the Friends of WMI asked me to speak at this event, I thought, why me? I'm not a person who speaks to groups. Then I realized I do speak to groups 180 days a year. I'm just not accustomed to the audience being older than 6. One of the first things I teach each year is how to be a good listener. I'll hope that's not needed, so I'll go on. What do I love? Education. More specifically, public education. I attended public schools from kindergarten through my master's degree. My schools were Marlette Elementary, Fort Branch Middle School, Gibson Southern High School, the University of Southern Indiana, and Indiana State University. If we were together today, I would ask you to raise your hand if you too attended a public school for at least 1 year of your education. Then I would ask you to raise your hand if you attended a public school that is now closed. This is for those with the raised hands. I will explain how your school came into being and why some schools went away. I hope to add to your education today because education is not the problem. Education is the solution. When thinking about a speech title, I wanted something patriotic since this is Independence Day. I thought about song titles. Maybe my favorite Hoosier songwriter, John Mellencamp, could help me. Yes, he has that song, R-O-C-K in the USA. I might entitle the speech, ED in the USA. Oh, no, that's not a good idea. My title is Public Education, Past, Present, and Future. In honor of this patriotic occasion, we will begin with a history lesson about American education. To be sure that I had my facts straight, I pulled an undergraduate textbook and historical approach to American education from the bookcase to refresh my memory. In 1647, the General Court of Massachusetts put into law a requirement that each town of 50 or more families appoint a teacher of reading and writing. The laws governing these early schools established some significant points. The state could require education. The state could require towns to maintain teachers. Civil authorities can control schools. Public funds can be used to support education. In 1749, Benjamin Franklin established a plan for an English grammar school in Philadelphia. In 1779, Thomas Jefferson introduced to the Virginia legislature a bill for the more general diffusion of knowledge. It feels so appropriate to talk about this bill in the room for the dissemination of useful knowledge. Although neither of these proposals were enacted, they did make the statement that intellectuals saw a need to provide education in order for citizens to effectively carry out the functions of a democracy. Franklin and Jefferson's contributions would ensure the continuing existence of the United States as an independent nation. Self-government would require a firm foundation of educated citizens. Education would be seen as a right and a responsibility of every American child. This educational system would set the U.S. apart globally. In 1785, under the Articles of Confederation, the Northwest Ordinance called for the territory to be surveyed and divided into townships. Each township was divided into 36 sections. The income derived from the 16th section was to be set aside to fund schools. The ordinance of 1787 stated that education is necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind. The United States Constitution did not mention education. The 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights states that powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states. Most states delegated much of the power to local school districts. During the 19th century, the common school evolved. It was not called common as in ordinary, it was common as in community. This was a cultural community in which ideas, experiences, beliefs, aspirations, and values would become uniquely American. It was essentially an elementary school for the skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. For the immigrant children, the common school was the path to Americanization and a new way of life. In the early 19th century, the United States experienced a period for societal reform. Reform movements included temperance, abolition of slavery, women's rights, utopian socialism, as we in New Harmony are well aware, and public education. While some of these efforts faded away, public education through common schools became one of the greatest achievements of American society. Mass education was viewed as the means to achieving the American dream. Locally, the Harmonists placed a high priority on education to better humankind and promote happiness. Schooling was available to both girls and boys together for ages 6 to 14. This included children both within and outside the Harmonist community. In this period of social reform, a significant influence on education was Horace Mann. He believed that organized education could liberate human intelligence and affect both individual and social reformation. He taught that political and social liberties could be secure only when people were educated enough to make intelligent decisions. Educational opportunities would be free and open equally to all. As more common schools opened, it became necessary to prepare enough competent teachers to staff these schools. Horace Mann established normal schools, later called teacher colleges, then called state colleges, and worked for the improvement of teachers' salaries. The increase in teachers' salaries was designed to attract more competent individuals to teaching. Horace Mann's lifespan coincided with the beginning of mass industrial production. This saw the nation's power moving from agriculture to industry. This business and industrial property would provide a tax base to finance the common school system. In 1827, the state of Massachusetts made the total support of schools by taxation compulsory. Other states in New England and the Midwest followed that model. The Middle Atlantic states gradually adopted this model as well. The southern states did not totally support schools until after the Civil War. In addition to state taxes, the states used money from the sale of public land to fund education. Also in 1827, William McClure opened a school in New Harmony. For McClure, education was a primary concern, essential to promoting good character and improving society. This school continued until 1860. In that same year, a 4-year high school for both girls and boys was established in New Harmony. Nationally, public high schools were established in the 1870s and 1880s. The early 1900s high school was supported by and filled the needs of the new corporate structure. From 1880 to 1920, the American high school was primarily college preparatory. In 1918, the National Education Association established a commission to examine the function of the high school. This resulted in a curriculum that included skills for being a citizen, earner, parent, and consumer. This comprehensive high school was well established by 1930. As we are more familiar with the 20th century, I will just list significant educational historical events for this time period. 1913, New Harmony constructed a new school on the site of the Harmonist Church. 1919, all states have laws providing funds for transporting children to schools. 1944, the GI Bill of Rights enabled 238,000 veterans to become teachers. 1946, Congress approved the National School Lunch Act. 1954, U.S. Supreme Court announced its decision in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, ruling that separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. 1957, federal troops enforced integration in Little Rock, Arkansas. 1958, the National Defense Education Act authorized increased funding for science, math, and foreign language education. 1965, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act provided federal funds to initiate programs such as Title I in bilingual education. 1975, federal funding for special education began. 1980, the Federal Department of Education became a cabinet-level agency. 1983, high school requirements were expanded to include computer science. While the 20th century saw large-scale federal programs of assistance enacted, local control persisted. That gives us the history of American public education up to 1983. So now I'll enter into the more recent period as I entered the teaching profession in 1984. I'll start with how I came to be a teacher. Nearly every Sunday during my formative years of the 1960s and 70s, I would find myself at Grandma's dinner table. As I enjoyed the delicious food, I also enjoyed the pleasant stories of teaching shared by my grandpa, my dad, my aunt, and my uncle. Nearly every adult at the table was a teacher, and those who did not teach worked in educational support positions at some time. It was obvious to me that teaching was a fulfilling career. My brother, seated next to me on the bench, became a math teacher. If you had Mr. Wheaton as a teacher in Warwick County, that's my grandpa. If you had Mr. Wheaton as a teacher in Vanderburgh County, that's my dad. If you had Mr. Wheaton as a teacher in Posey County, that's my brother. So I went to college to be a teacher. I soon learned that not everyone regarded teaching as I did. On one occasion, I was sitting and talking with a group of friends and acquaintances. And as often happens at college, we began to discuss our future careers. One in the group said to me, "Why do you want to be a teacher? You are smart enough to be something better." I was shocked and thought, there is something wrong with that. I, of course, did not let that impact my career path, and I have greatly enjoyed 28 and a half and counting years of teaching kindergarten. The past 20 years have been the age of accountability. We have been through No Child Left Behind, the Every Student Succeeds Act, Race to the Top, Common Core Standards, and School Choice. Time magazine recently reported that this national effort to reform based on testing, competition, and punishment has been ineffective and harmful. While those national measures have impacted our current education, the state is still, as it was in 1791, the primary power in education. This became all too meaningful in 2008. That is the year when Indiana restructured the way it funds public schools. Prior to this, 85% of the general fund came from state income and sales taxes, and 15% came from local property tax. In 2008, local funding was gone, and 100% came from the state income and sales taxes. Also in 2008 was the Great Recession. Indiana was hit especially hard, leading to greatly reduced state income tax. Governor Daniels used emergency budget funding power to cut school funding by $300 million. This funding was never replaced. What did this look like in daily life? In the spring of 2010, the school where I was teaching, Hedges Central in Mount Vernon, closed. Some teachers lost their jobs, others were relocated. In the fall of 2010, I had a class of 25 kindergartners. It had been a class of 18 1 year earlier. The Gifted and Talented program was eliminated. Course offerings at the high school were cut. In 2011, I, along with my colleagues, took a pay cut that would not be regained until 2018, not accounting for inflation. And as many of you know, sadly, in 2012, New Harmony School closed. In 2011, Indiana started the nation's largest school voucher program. This has taken $161 million a year away from public schools. Vouchers allow students to take public dollars to private schools, including religious schools, for tuition expenses. Some of these schools are selective and may turn students away. These schools are not held to the same requirements as public schools. Time magazine reported in February of 2020 that voucher students in Indiana have lower achievement than public school students. Charter schools are another drain on public school funding. The Evansville Courier reported earlier this year that the Indiana legislature gave out well over $100 million to virtual charter schools with no measure of supervision. How does Indiana compare to other states in support for public schools? Indiana is currently 47th in per pupil spending, 39th in teacher retention, and 36th in teacher pay. The fourth generation teacher in my family teaches in another state. The teacher shortage has arrived in Indiana. An increasing number of new hires each year do not have the required degree or have not passed the required tests, or both. They are working with an emergency license. We must attract and retain quality teachers. Our economy depends on education. I am reminded of Horace Mann's 19th century work. The increase in teachers' salaries was designed to attract more competent individuals to teaching. I have concerns about the federal level as well. On February 4th of this year, I watched the State of the Union address. Our president gave a scholarship to a third grade girl so she wouldn't have to attend what he referred to as a government school. Once again, I was shocked and thought, there is something wrong with that. Looking toward the future, learning continues for students and teachers too. The education of teachers is never completed, but is a continually active process. During the current pandemic, I have learned virtually to teach in Google Classroom. I have experienced more changes in teaching than I could have ever imagined possible when I began. But in spite of all the changes, the business of education is always about the individual. It should be about each student fulfilling his or her own possibilities. So with our eyes on the future, let's hear from the future. Why is school important?
Because it helps you learn. You do math problems, you do stuff. You have to learn to get better.
And what do you want to be when you grow up?
A teacher.
Thank you so much, Tammy. And now we will have Ryan Rokicki, Director of the Working Men's Institute, present New Harmony's Volunteer of the Year Award.
It is my pleasure to announce that Tom Cochran is the Volunteer of the Year because of the community service he has provided to the town of New Harmony throughout this year and in all prior years. He has served as the treasurer of the Kiwanis Club for the past 13 years, maintaining accounts on dues, fundraisers, and scholarships. He has allocated Kiwanis donations to various organizations in Posey County, such as Big Brother and Big Sister and Willow Tree. Tom also collects and maintains the money donated to Riley Children's Hospital from collections jars that are placed around the town. Tom volunteers at the New Harmony Ministries food pantry. When the food pantry had to move from the Baptist Church basement to the Catholic Community Center, Tom provided the way and means to move the refrigerators and the freezers at his own expense. Tom is a trustee at his church and a part-time preacher. And I might add, he is also a loyal member of the Working Men's Institute. When Tom found out he was being considered Volunteer of the Year, he stated he thought there were others who were more deserving, which is just the response you would expect from the 2020 Volunteer of the Year, Tom Cochran. Tom, it's my pleasure to present this award to you on behalf of Tri Kappa and Kiwanis.
Thank you, Ron. This is really something. I've lived here in New Harmony now for over 20 years, and as I said to Ken back, there are many more people in this community who are more deserving of this, but I do thank you. Thank you all very much.
Tom, we have a $50 gift certificate for you as well.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you for all you do for New Harmony.
Well, thank you.
Congratulations, Tom, and thank you, Ryan. We will close our celebration this morning with one final song from our community choir. Again, thank you so much for attending this morning with us, and happy Independence Day.
Our final selection is entitled simply New Harmony. And our friend Mickey Grimm wrote this for the choir to sing at the bicentennial celebration. And every year I get a text from him asking if we're going to sing it again, and of course we are.
It's not just mine. It's not just yours. It's our home. Our very New Harmony.